Chapter 79 of Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Diamonds are diamonds. Kate and Alice, as they drew near to their journey's end, were both a little flurried, and I cannot but own that there was cause for nervousness. Kate Vavasor was to meet Mr. Grey for the first time. Mr. Grey was now staying at Matching, and was to remain there until a week of his marriage. He was then to return to Cambridgeshire for a day or two, and after that was to become a guest at the rector's house at Matching the evening before the ceremony. Why not let him come here at once? Lady Glencora had said to her husband. It is such nonsense, you know. But Mr. Palliser would not hear of it. Mr. Palliser, though a radical in public life, would not for worlds transgress the social laws of his ancestors, and so the matter was settled. Kate, on this very day of her arrival at Matching, would thus see Mr. Grey for the first time, and she could not but feel that she had been the means of doing Mr. Grey much injury. She had moreover something, not much indeed, but still something, of that feeling which made the Pallisers terrible to the imagination, because of their rank and wealth. She was a little afraid of the Pallisers, but of Mr. Grey she was very much afraid, and Alice also was not at her ease. She would fain have prevented so very quick a marriage, had she not felt that now, after all the trouble that she had caused, there was nothing left for her but to do as others wished. When a day had been named, she had hardly dared to demur, and had allowed Lady Glencora to settle everything as she had wished. But it was not only the suddenness of her marriage which dismayed her. Its nature and attributes were terrible to her. Both Lady Midlothian and the Marchioness of Auld Reekie were coming. When this was told to her by letter, she had no means of escape. Lady Macleod is right in nearly all that she says, Lady Glencora had written to her. At any rate, you needn't be such a fool as to run away from your cousins, simply because they have handles to their names. You must take the thing as it comes. Lady Glencora, moreover, had settled for her the list of bridesmaids. Alice had made a petition that she might be allowed to go through the ceremony with only one, with none but Kate to back her. But she ought to have known that when she consented to be married at Matching, and indeed she had had very little power of resisting that proposition, all such questions would be decided for her. 2 daughters, therefore, of Lady Midlothian were to act, Lady Jane and Lady Mary, and the one daughter of the Marchioness, who was also a Lady Jane, and there were to be 2 Miss Howards down from London, girls who were known both to Alice and to Lady Glencora, and who were in some distant way connected with them both. A great attempt was made to induce the 2 Miss Pallisers to join the bevy, but they had frankly pleaded their age. No woman should stand up as a bridesmaid, said the strong-minded Sophie, who doesn't mean to get married if she can. Now I don't mean to get married, and I won't put myself among the young people. Lady Glencora was therefore obliged to submit to do the work with only 6. But she swore that they should be very smart. She was to give all the dresses, and Mr. Palliser was to give a brooch and an armlet to each. She is the only person in the world I want to pet, except yourself, Lady Glencora had said to her husband, and he had answered by giving her carte blanche as regards expense. All this was very terrible to Kate, who had not much feminine taste for finery. Of the dress she had heard, of the dress which was waiting at Matching to be made up after her arrival, though as yet she knew nothing of the trinkets. There are many girls who could submit themselves at a moment to the kindness of such a woman as Lady Glencora. Perhaps most girls would do so, for of all such women in the world, Lady Glencora was the least inclined to patronize or to be condescending in her kindnesses. But Kate Vavasor was one to whom such submission would not come easily. "I wish I was out of this boat," she said to Alice in the train, "so that I might be shipwrecked alone." "No, there can be no shipwreck to you. When the day of action comes, you will be taken away up to heaven upon the clouds. But what are they to do with me? You'll find that Glencora will not desert you. You can't conceive what taste she has. I'd sooner be bridesmaid to Charlie Fairstairs. I would indeed. My place in the world is not among cabinet ministers and old countesses, nor mine. Yes, it seems that yours is to be there. They are your cousins, and you have made at any rate one great friend among them, one who is to be the biggest of them all. And you are going to throw me over, Kate? To tell the truth, Alice, I sometimes think you had better throw me over. I know it would be sad for both, but perhaps it would be better. I have done you much harm and no good, and now where I am going I shall disgrace you." She talked even of getting out at some station and returning, and would have done so had not Alice made it impossible. As it was, the evening found her and Alice together entering the park gate at Matching, in Lady Glencora's carriage. Lady Glencora had sent a note to the station. She could not come herself, she said, because Mr. Palliser was a little fussy. "You'll understand, dear, but don't say a word." Alice didn't say a word, having been very anxious not to lower Mr. Palliser in her cousin's respect. None of the Lady Janes and Lady Marys were at Matching when they arrived. Indeed, there was no guest there but Mr. Grey, for which Kate felt herself to be extremely grateful. Mr. Grey came into the hall, standing behind Mr. Palliser, who stood behind his wife. Alice passed by them both, and was at once in her lover's arms. "Then I must introduce myself," said Lady Glencora to Kate, "and my husband also." This she did, and no woman in England could have excelled her in the manner of doing it. "I have heard so much about you," said she, still keeping Kate's hand, "and I know how good you've been, and how wicked you have been," she added in a whisper. Then Mr. Grey was brought up to her, and they were introduced. It was not till some days had passed over them that she felt herself at all at her ease with Mr. Grey, and I doubt whether she ever reached that point with Mr. Palliser. But Lady Glencora she knew and liked, and almost loved, from the first moment of their meeting. "Have you heard the news?" said Lady Glencora to Alice, the first minute that they were alone. Alice, of course, had not heard the news. "Mr. Bott is going to marry Mrs. Marsham. There is such a row about it. Plantagenet is nearly mad. I never knew him so disgusted in my life. Of course I don't dare to tell him so, but I am so heartily rejoiced. You know how I love them both, and I could not possibly wish any better reward for either." Alice, who had personally known more of Mr. Bott than of Mrs. Marsham, said that she couldn't but be sorry for the lady. "She's old enough to be his mother," said Lady Glencora. "Otherwise I really don't know any people better suited to each other. The best is that Mr. Bott is doing it to regain his footing with Mr. Palliser. I am sure of that. And Plantagenet will never speak to him again. But, Alice, there is other news." "What other news?" "It is hardly news yet, and of course I am very wicked to tell you, but I feel sure Mr. Gray knows all about it, and if I didn't tell, he would. He hasn't told me anything yet. He hasn't had time, and when he does, you mustn't pretend to know. I believe Mr. Palliser will certainly be Chancellor of the Exchequer before next month, and if so, he'll never come in for Silverbridge again." "But he'll be in Parliament, will he not?" "Oh, yes, he'll be in Parliament. I don't understand all about it. There is a man going out for the county, for Barsetshire, some man whom the Duke used to favour, and he wants Plantagenet to come in for that. I can't understand what difference it makes." "But he will be in the Cabinet." "Oh, yes, but who do you suppose is to be the new member for Silverbridge?" "I can't guess," said Alice, though of course she did guess. "Mind, I don't know it. He has never told me, but he told me that he has been with the Duke, and asked the Duke to let Geoffrey have the seat. The Duke became as black as thunder, and said that Geoffrey had no fortune. In short, he wouldn't hear of it. Poor Geoffrey! We must try to do something for him, but I really don't know how. Then the Duke said that Plantagenet should put in for Silverbridge some friend who would support himself, and I fancy, mind it's only fancy, but I fancy that Plantagenet mentioned to his Grace one Mr. Gray." "Oh, Glencora! They've been talking together till sometimes I think Mr. Gray is worse than Plantagenet. When Mr. Gray began to say something the other night in the drawing-room about sugar, I knew it was all up with you. He'll be a financial secretary, you see if he isn't, or a lord of something, or an under somebody of state, and then some day he'll go mad, either because he does or because he doesn't get into the Cabinet." Lady Glencora, as she said all this, knew well that the news she was giving would please her cousin better than any other tidings that could be told. By degrees the guests came. The two Miss Howards were the first, and they expressed themselves as delighted with Lady Glencora's taste and with Mr. Palliser's munificence, for at that time the brooches and armlets had been produced. Kate had said very little about these matters, but the Miss Howards were loud in their thanks. But they were good-humoured, merry girls, and the house was pleasanter after their arrival than it had been before. Then came the dreaded personage, the guest, Lady Midlothian. On the subject of Lady Midlothian, Kate had really become curious. She had a real desire to see the face and gait of the woman, and to hear her voice. Lady Midlothian came, and with her came Lady Jane and Lady Mary. I am by no means sure that Lady Jane and Lady Mary were not nearly as old as the two Miss Pallisers, but they were not probably so fully resolved as to the condition of their future modes of living as were those two ladies, and if so, they were not wrong to shine as bridesmaids. With them Alice had made some slight acquaintance during the last spring in London, and as they were now to attend upon her as the bride, they were sufficiently gracious. To Kate, too, they were civil enough, and things in public went on very pleasantly at Matching. A scene there was, of course, between Alice and Lady Midlothian, a scene in private. "You must go through it," Lady Glencora had said with jocose mournfulness, "and why should you not let her jump upon you a little? It can't hurt you now." "But I don't like people to jump upon me," Alice said. "And why are you to have everything just as you like it? You are so unreasonable. Think how I've been jumped on. Think what I have borne from them. If you knew the things she used to say to me, you would not be such a coward. I was sent down to her for a week, and had no power of helping myself, and the Marchioness used to be sent for to look at me, for she never talks. She used to look at me, and groan, and hold up her hands till I hated her the worst of the two. Think what they did to me, and yet they are my dear friends now. Why should you escape altogether?" Alice could not escape altogether, and therefore was closeted with Lady Midlothian for the best part of an hour. "Did Lady Macleod read to you what I wrote?" the Countess asked. "Yes, that is, she gave me the letter to read. And I hope you understand me, Alice." "Oh yes, I suppose so." "You suppose so, my dear? If you only suppose so, I shall not be contented. I want you to appreciate my feelings towards you thoroughly. I want you to know that I am most anxious as to your future life, and that I am thoroughly satisfied with the step you are now taking." The Countess paused, but Alice said nothing. Her tongue was itching to tell the old woman that she cared nothing for this expression of satisfaction, but she was aware that she had done much that was deserving of punishment, and resolved to take this as part of her penance. She was being jumped upon, and it was unpleasant. But after all that had happened, it was only fitting that she should undergo much unpleasantness. "Thoroughly satisfied," continued the Countess, "and now I only wish to refer, in the slightest manner possible, to what took place between us when we were both of us under this roof last winter." "Why refer to it at all, Lady Midlothian?" "Because I think it may do good, and because I cannot make you understand that I have thoroughly forgiven everything, unless I tell you that I have forgiven that also. On that occasion I had come all the way from Scotland on purpose to say a few words to you. I am so sorry that you should have had the trouble. I do not regret it, Alice. I never do regret doing anything which I believe to have been my duty. There is no knowing how far what I said then may have operated for good." Alice thought that she knew very well, but she said nothing. "I must confess that what I then understood to be your obstinacy, and I must say also, if I tell the truth, your indifference to all prudential considerations whatever, not to talk of appearances and decorum, and I might say anything like a high line of duty or moral conduct, shocked me very much. It did indeed, my dear. Taking it altogether, I don't know that I was ever more shocked in my life. The thing was so inscrutable." Here Lady Midlothian held up one hand in a manner that was truly imposing. "So inscrutable. But that is all over now. What was personally offensive to myself I could easily forgive, and I do forgive it. I shall never think of it any more." Here Lady Midlothian put up both her hands gently, as though wafting the injury away into the air. "But what I wish specially to say to you is this: your own conduct is forgiven also." Here she paused again, and Alice winced. Who was this dreadful old Countess? What was the Countess to her, that she should be thus tormented with the old woman's forgiveness? John Grey had forgiven her, and of external forgiveness that was enough. She had not forgiven herself, would never forgive herself altogether, and the pardon of no old woman in England could assist her in doing so. She had sinned, but she had not sinned against Lady Midlothian. "Let her jump upon you, and have done with it," Lady Glencora had said. She had resolved that it should be so, but it was very hard to keep her resolution. "The Marchioness and I have talked it over," continued Lady Midlothian, "and she has asked me to speak for both her and myself." "There is comfort at any rate in that," thought Alice, who had never yet seen the Marchioness. "We have resolved that all those little mistakes should be as though they had never been committed. We shall both be most happy to receive you and your husband, who is, I must say, one of the most gentlemanlike looking men I ever saw. It seems that he and Mr. Palliser are on most friendly, I may say most confidential terms, and that must be quite a pleasure to you." "It's a pleasure to him, which is more to the purpose," said Alice. "Exactly so. And now, my dear, everything is forgiven and shall be forgotten. Come and give me a kiss, and let me wish you joy." Alice did as she was bidden, and accepted the kiss and the congratulations, and a little box of jewelry which Lady Midlothian produced from out of her pocket. "The diamonds are from the Marchioness, my dear, whose means, as you doubtless are aware, greatly exceed my own. The garnets are from me. I hope they may both be worn long and happily." I hardly know which was the worst, the lecture, the kiss, or the present. The latter she would have declined had it been possible, but it was not possible. When she had agreed to be married at Matching, she had not calculated the amount of punishment which would thereby be inflicted on her, but I think that, though she bore it impatiently, she was aware that she had deserved it. Although she fretted herself greatly under the infliction of Lady Midlothian, she acknowledged to herself, even at the time, that she deserved all the lashes she received. She had made a fool of herself in her vain attempt to be greater and grander than other girls, and it was only fair that her folly should be in some sort punished before it was fully pardoned. John Grey punished it after one fashion, by declining to allude to it, or to think of it, or to take any account of it. And now Lady Midlothian had punished it after another fashion, and Alice went out of the Countess's presence with sundry inward exclamations of mea culpa, and with many unseen beatings of the breast. 2 days before the ceremony came the Marchioness and her august daughter. Her Lady Jane was much more august than the other Lady Jane, very much more august indeed. She had very long flaxen hair, and very light blue eyes, which she did not move frequently, and she spoke very little, one may almost say not at all, and she never seemed to do anything, but she was very august, and was, as all the world knew, engaged to marry the Duke of Dumfriesshire, who, though twice her own age, was as yet childless, as soon as he should have completed his mourning for his first wife. Kate told her cousin that she did not at all know how she would ever stand up as one in a group with so august a person as this Lady Jane, and Alice herself felt that such an attendant would quite obliterate her. But Lady Jane and her mother were both harmless. The Marchioness never spoke to Kate, and hardly spoke to Alice, and the Marchioness's Lady Jane was quite as silent as her mother. On the morning of this day, the day on which these very august people came, a telegram arrived at the Priory calling for Mr. Palliser's immediate presence in London. He came to Alice full of regret, and behaved himself very nicely. Alice now regarded him quite as a friend. "Of course I understand," she said, "and I know that the business which takes you up to London pleases you." "Well, yes, it does please me. I am glad, I don't mind saying so to you, but it does not please me to think that I shall be away at your marriage. Pray make your father understand that it was absolutely unavoidable. But I shall see him, of course, when I come back, and I shall see you too before very long." "Shall you?" "Oh, yes." "And why so?" "Because Mr. Grey must be at Silverbridge for his election. But perhaps I ought not to tell you his secrets." Then he took her into the breakfast parlour and showed her his present. It was a service of Sèvres china, very precious and beautiful. I got you these things because Gray likes china." "So do I like china," said she, with her face brighter than he had ever yet seen it. "I thought you would like them best," said he. Alice, looking up at him with her eyes full of tears, told him that she did like them best, and then, as he wished her all happiness, and as he was stooping over her to kiss her, Lady Glencora came in. "I beg pardon," said she. "I was just 1 minute too soon, was I not?" "She would have them sent here and unpacked," said Mr. Palliser, "though I told her it was foolish." "Of course I would," said Lady Glencora. "Everything shall be unpacked and shown. It's easy to get somebody to pack them again." Much of the wedding tribute had already been deposited with the china, and among other things there were the jewels that Lady Midlothian had brought. "Upon my word, her ladyship's diamonds are not to be sneezed at," said Lady Glencora. "I don't care for diamonds," said Alice. Then Lady Glencora took up the Countess's trinkets, and shook her head and turned up her nose. There was a wonderfully comic expression on her face as she did so. "To me they are just as good as the others," said Alice. "To me they are not, then," said Lady Glencora. "Diamonds are diamonds, and garnets are garnets, and I am not so romantic but what I know the difference." On the evening before the marriage, Alice and Lady Glencora walked for the last time through the Priory ruins. It was now September, and the evenings were still long, so that the ladies could get out upon the lawn after dinner. Whether Lady Glencora would have been allowed to walk through the ruins so late as 8:30 in the evening, if her husband had been there, may be doubtful. But her husband was away, and she took this advantage of his absence. "Do you remember that night we were here?" said Lady Glencora. "When shall I forget it? Or how is it possible that such a night should ever be forgotten?" "No, I shall never forget it. Oh dear, what wonderful things have happened since that! Do you ever think of Geoffrey?" "Yes, of course I think of him. I did like him so much. I hope I shall see him some day." "And he liked you too, young woman. And what was more, young woman, I thought at one time that perhaps you were going to like him in earnest." "Not in that way, certainly." "You've done much better, of course, especially as poor Geoffrey's chance of promotion doesn't look so good now. If I have a boy, I wonder whether he'll hate me." "Why should he hate you?" "I can't help it, you know, if he does. Only think what it is to Plantagenet. Have you seen the difference it makes in him already?" "Of course it makes a difference, the greatest difference in the world." "And think what it will be to me, Alice. I used to lie in bed and wish myself dead, and make up my mind to drown myself, if only I could dare. I shan't think any more of that poor fellow now." Then she told Alice what had been done for Burgo, how his uncle had paid his bills once again, and had agreed to give him a small income. "Poor fellow," said Lady Glencora, "it won't do more than buy him gloves, you know." The marriage was magnificent, greatly to the dismay of Alice, and to the discomfort of Mr. Vavasor, who came down on the eve of the ceremony, arriving while his daughter and Lady Glencora were in the ruins. Mr. Grey seemed to take it all very easily, and, as Lady Glencora said, played his part exactly as though he were in the habit of being married, at any rate, once a year. "Nothing on earth will ever put him out, so you need not try, my dear," she said, as Alice stood with her a moment alone in the dressing-room upstairs before her departure. "I know that," said Alice, "and therefore I shall never try." Chapter 79. Chapter 80 of Can You Forgive Her? By Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. The story is finished within the halls of the Duke of Omnium. Mr. Gray and wife were duly carried away from Matching Priory by post-horses, and did their honeymoon, we may be quite sure, with much satisfaction. When Alice was first asked where she would go, she simply suggested that it should not be to Switzerland. They did, in truth, go by slow stages to Italy, to Venice, Florence, and on to Rome, but such had not been their intention when they first started on their journey. At that time Mr. Gray believed that he would be wanted again in England, down at Silverbridge, in Barsetshire, very shortly. But before he had married a week, he learned that all that was to be postponed. The cup of fruition had not yet reached Mr. Palliser's lips. There will be no vacancy either in the county or in the borough till Parliament meets. That had been the message sent by Mr. Palliser to Mr. Gray. Lady Glencora's message to Alice had been rather more full, having occupied 3 pages of notepaper, the last of which had been crossed, but I do not know that it was more explicit. She had abused Lord Brock, had abused Mr. Finespun, and had abused all public things and institutions, because the arrangements as now proposed would be very comfortable to Alice, but would not, as she was pleased to think, be very comfortable to herself. You can go to Rome and see everything, and enjoy yourself, which I was not allowed to do, and all this noise and bother and crowd of electioneering will take place down in Barsetshire, just when I am in the middle of all my trouble. There were many very long letters came from Lady Glencora to Rome during the winter, letters which Alice enjoyed thoroughly, but which she could not but regard as being very indiscreet. The Duke was at the castle during the Christmas week, and the descriptions of the Duke and of his solicitude as to his heir were very comic. He comes and bends over me on the sofa in the most stupendous way, as though a woman to be the mother of his heir must be a miracle in nature. He is quite awful when he says a word or two, and more awful in his silence. The devil prompted me the other day, and I said I hoped it would be a girl. There was a look came over his face which nearly frightened me. If it should be, I believe he will turn me out of the house. But how can I help it? I wish you were going to have a baby at the same time. Then if yours was a boy and mine a girl, we'd make a change. This was very indiscreet. Lady Glencora would write indiscreet letters like this, which Alice could not show to her husband. It was 1,000 pities. But December and January wore themselves away, and the time came in which the Greys were bound to return to England. The husband had very fully discussed with his wife that matter of his parliamentary ambition, and found in her a very ready listener. Having made up his mind to do this thing, he was resolved to do it thoroughly, and was becoming almost as full of politics, almost as much devoted to sugar as Mr. Palliser himself. He, at any rate, could not complain that his wife would not interest herself in his pursuits. Then, as they returned, came letters from Lady Glencora, written as her troubles grew nigh. The Duke had gone, of course, but he was to be there at the appointed time. Oh, I do so wish he would have a fit of the gout in London, or at Timbuctoo, said Lady Glencora. When they reached London, they first heard the news from Mr. Vavasor, who on this occasion condescended to meet them at the railway. The Duke has got an heir, he said, before the carriage door was open, born this morning. One might have supposed that it was the Duke's baby, and not the baby of Lady Glencora and Mr. Palliser. There was a note from Mr. Palliser to Mr. Grey. "Thank God," said the note, "Lady Glencora and the boy" Mr. Palliser had scorned to use the word child "Lady Glencora and the boy are quite as well as can be expected. Both the new writs were moved for last night." Mr. Palliser's honours, as will be seen, came rushing upon him all at once. Wondrous little baby, purpureo genitus, what have the gods not done for thee, if thou canst only manage to live till the good things are all thine own, to live through all the terrible solicitude with which they will envelop thee. Better than royal rank will be thine, with influence more than royal, and power of action fettered by no royalty, royal wealth which will be really thine own, to do with as it beseemeth thee. Thou wilt be at the top of an aristocracy in a country where aristocrats need gird themselves with no buckram. All that the world can give will be thine. And yet when we talk of thee religiously, philosophically, or politico-economically, we are wont to declare that thy chances of happiness are no better, if they be no worse, than are those of thine infant neighbour just born in that farmyard cradle. Who shall say that they are better, or that they are worse? Or if they be better, or if they be worse, how shall we reconcile to ourselves that seeming injustice? And now we will pay a little visit to the small one born in the purple, and the story of that visit shall be the end of our history. It was early in April, quite early in April, and Mr. and Mrs. Grey were both at Gatherum Castle. Mrs. Grey was there at the moment of which we write, but Mr. Grey was absent at Silverbridge with Mr. Palliser. This was the day of the Silverbridge election, and Mr. Grey had gone to that ancient borough to offer himself as a candidate to the electors, backed by the presence and aid of a very powerful member of the cabinet. Lady Glencora and Alice were sitting upstairs with the small purple-born one in their presence, and the small purple-born one was lying in Alice's lap. "It is such a comfort that it is over," said the mother. "You are the most ungrateful of women. Oh, Alice, if you could have known, your baby may come just as it pleases. You won't lie awake trembling how on earth you will bear your disgrace if one of the vile weaker sex should come to disturb the hopes of your lords and masters. For I had two, which made it so much more terrible. I'm sure Mr. Palliser would not have said a word. No, he would have said nothing, nor would the Duke. The Duke would simply have gone away instantly, and never have seen me again till the next chance comes, if it ever does come. And Mr. Palliser would have been as gentle as a dove, much more gentle than he is now, for men are rarely gentle in their triumph. But I should have known what they both thought and felt. It's all right now, dear. Yes, my bonny boy, you have made it all right for me, have you not?" And Lady Glencora took her baby into her own arms. "You have made everything right, my little man. But, oh, Alice, if you had seen the Duke's long face through those 3 days, if you had heard the tones of the people's voices as they whispered about me, if you had encountered the oppressive cheerfulness of those 2 London doctors are such bad actors, you would have thought it impossible for any woman to live throughout. There's one comfort. If my mannikin lives, I can't have another eldest. He looks like living, don't he, Alice?" Then were perpetrated various mysterious ceremonies of feminine idolatry, which were continued till there came a grandly dressed old lady, who called herself the nurse, and who took the idol away. In the course of that afternoon, Lady Glencora took Alice all over the house. It was a castle of enormous size, quite new, having been built by the present proprietor, very cold, very handsome, and very dull. "What an immense place!" said Alice, as she stood looking round her in the grand hall, which was never used as an entrance except on very grand occasions. "Is it not? And it cost—oh, I can't tell you how much it cost, £100,000 or more. Well, that would be nothing, as the Duke no doubt had the money in his pocket to do what he liked with at the time. But the joke is, nobody ever thinks of living here. Who'd live in such a great, overgrown place, such as this, if they could get a comfortable house like Matching? Do you remember Longroyston and the hot water pipes? I always think of the poor Duchess when I come through here. Nobody ever lives here, or ever will. The Duke comes for 1 week in the year, and Plantagenet says he hates to do that. As for me, nothing on earth shall ever make me live here. I was completely in their power, and couldn't help their bringing me here the other day, because I had, as it were, disgraced myself." "How disgraced yourself?" "In being so long, you know, before that gentleman was born. But they shan't play me the same trick again. I shall dare to assert myself now. Come, we must go away. There are some of the British public come to see one of the British sights. That's another pleasure here. One has to run about to avoid being caught by the visitors. The housekeeper tells me they always grumble because they are not allowed to go into my little room upstairs." On the evening of that day Mr. Palliser and Mr. Grey returned home from Silverbridge together. The latter was then a member of Parliament, but the former at that moment was the possessor of no such dignity. The election for the borough was now over, whereas that for the county had not yet taken place. But there was no rival candidate for the position, and Mr. Palliser was thoroughly contented with his fate. He was at this moment actually Chancellor of the Exchequer, and in about 10 days' time would be on his legs in the House, proposing for his country's use his scheme of finance. The two men were seated together in an open carriage, and were being whirled along by 4 horses. They were both no doubt happy in their ambition. But I think that of the two, Mr. Palliser showed his triumph the most. Not that he spoke even to his friend a word that was triumphant in its tone. It was not thus that he rejoiced. He was by nature too placid for that. But there was a nervousness in his contentment which told the tale to any observer who might know how to read it. "I hope you'll like it," he said to Grey. "I shall never like it as you do," Grey answered. "And why not?" "Why not? In the first place, I have not begun it so young. Any time before 35 is young enough. For useful work, yes, but hardly for enjoyment in the thing. And then I don't believe it all as you do. To you the British House of Commons is everything." "Yes, everything," said Mr. Palliser, with unwonted enthusiasm. "Everything, everything. That and the Constitution are everything. It is not so to me. Ah, but it will be. If you really take to the work, and put yourself into harness, it will be so. You'll get to feel it as I do. The man who is counted by his colleagues as number 1 on the Treasury bench in the English House of Commons is the first of living men. That's my opinion. I don't know that I ever said it before, but that's my opinion." "And who is the second, the purse-bearer to this great man?" "I say nothing about the second. I don't know that there is any second. I wonder how we shall find Lady Glencora and the boy." They had then arrived at the side entrance to the castle, and Mr. Grey ran upstairs to his wife's room to receive her congratulations. "And you are a member of Parliament?" she asked. "They tell me so, but I don't know whether I actually am one till I've taken the oaths. I am so happy. There's no position in the world so glorious. It's a pity you are not Mr. Palliser's wife. That's just what he has been saying. Oh, John, I am so happy. It is so much more than I have deserved. I hope, that is, I sometimes think—" "Think what, dearest?" "I hope nothing that I have ever said has driven you to it." "I'd do more than that, dear, to make you happy," he said, as he put his arm round her and kissed her. "More than that, at least, if it were in my power." Probably my readers may agree with Alice that in the final adjustment of her affairs she had received more than she had deserved. All her friends, except her husband, thought so. But as they have all forgiven her, including even Lady Midlothian herself, I hope that they who have followed her story to its close will not be less generous. End of chapter 80. End of Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope.